You're listening to Coffee Break Flight Instruction by MzeroA.com. Flight train tips in 15 minutes or less.
Hey everyone, Jason Shapper here of MzeroA.com alongside a good friend, Uncle Larry, certified flight instructor extraordinaire. This is Coffee Break Flight Instruction, flight train tips in 15 minutes or less. And to help keep myself honest, let me go ahead and start that timer here. That's going. Today's topic, by the way, 3 tips for better crosswind landings. After we released the book, The Secret to Perfect Landings, we had a chapter in there on crosswind landings. I got a ton of emails from you guys looking for more tips on crosswind landings. So I wanted to share that. And Larry and I, interestingly enough, kind of have some different views on a few things. So it might spark a good little debate here, but I'll dive right into it. First tip is this, and again, these are going to sound very basic, but when you actually put them to practice, you'll be amazed at how much they help you. And so the first is this: it's to know your limit and know the wind. Okay. First off, what is my limit? What is my limit as a pilot where I'm at today? Again, you guys know how big I am on having personal minimums. I try to beat that in everybody's head. They have to have personal minimums. So what are my personal minimums? Okay. What are the airplane's minimums, all right? The airplane has its own, maximum certified crosswind component. Basically, the test pilot flew it into X amount of crosswind and safely landed the airplane without running out of rudder authority, all right? So in the Cessna 150, that's 15 knots. Anything above 15 knots, I tell students, well, you become a test pilot much above 15 knots because the test pilot himself didn't even demonstrate a crosswind landing greater than 15 knots. Okay, that number's there for a reason. I don't like the idea of being a test pilot, and I'm sure my life insurance company wouldn't appreciate that if I called them up and said, yes, my new profession is test pilot. They're not going to think too highly of that. All right. So I've got to know my limit. I've got to know my airplane's limit, and I've got to know just what kind of wind I'm dealing with. You'd be amazed at how many times student pilots take off knowing it's a crosswind, but not knowing how much crosswind. Or worse yet, not knowing where the crosswind is coming from. Larry, have you ever had a student on final, and you're on final, and you're thinking, why are we crabbing this direction? Or why are we doing, like, look down at the windsock. It's so enlightening sometimes. But know what you're up against, okay? Know what kind of wind you're facing, how strong it is, and know where it's from. And where a lot of students get confused is, well, they read the METAR on the ground, but then they don't correlate, okay, I'm landing runway 36, so if the wind's from 270, that would be from where? They're thinking about where they're located on the ramp, not so much on when they're rolling down the runway or when they're on final, how is that wind going to be interacting with you? And better yet, through the entire traffic pattern. So know what you're dealing with, calculate that crosswind component. All right, and every POH has a crosswind component chart in it. There's no excuse to not calculate it. Second tip is this. Again, sounds basic, but you'd be surprised. Don't shy away from crosswinds. At the Marion County Denellen Airport, we're spoiled because our runways make a perfect X. You would have to try really hard to get a crosswind at our airport. And there are some days where it's kind of like that, but we never get a real strong crosswind. We have to go and seek out a crosswind, whereas just down the road at the Ocala Airport, well, the big main runway is 1836, all right? It's a nice big piece of pavement, but the winds aren't always blowing north-south. We get a lot of east-west winds here in Florida, surprisingly enough, okay? Don't shy away from the crosswinds because although, like my students, kind of have, can pick and choose which runway based on the winds, they may do a cross country one day to an airport, like the Ocala Airport, let's say, that doesn't have that luxury to just go down to, land into the wind every single time. So don't shy away from crosswinds, all right? It will make you a better pilot because of that. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying go against the grain of traffic. If there's 4 other airplanes in the traffic pattern, I'm by no means saying, well, let me use the other runway they're not using, the intersection. Don't be silly about it. I'm saying a nice uncontrolled airport on a Wednesday afternoon when nothing's happening, that's when you go do your crosswind landing practice, all right? But don't shy away from crosswinds. And the third and final tip is this. and this is where Larry and I kind of differ a little bit, and I'll let him chime in here in just a bit. I teach what's called the crab to side slip method. All right? And I'm in the minority with teaching this, okay? Most CFIs teach what, and Larry teaches both ways, so I'm not picking on Larry, but most CFIs teach the side slip method. So this is what I mean, crab to side slip method. The wind's coming from my left, I'm going to crab into the wind, all right? It's a very strange feeling. I'm crabbing into the wind, but I'm heading straight. I'm almost looking out my window, my side window as I'm coming in there. And as I enter into ground effect, as I enter into that transitionary phase, I transition to a side slip where I use my rudder to bring that nose back around straight, and I dip my wing into the wind, touching my upwind wheel down first, followed by the other two, and just kind of rolling out nicely, smoothly apply my crosswind correction. Whereas there's the side slip method, which basically is you hold that side slip, that one wing low approach, the entire way down. Now, my beef with this is, and then I'll let Larry chime in, a slip in my book is a fairly advanced maneuver. All right, I'm low, I'm slow. Why do I want to enter into a slip? And the reason a slip happens, the reason you descend so much in a slip is because aerodynamically, one wing is producing more lift than the other. In most Cessna aircraft, you'll see that big placard, avoid slips with flaps extended. Well, I understand that's kind of for some different reasons here, but still, I'm not a big fan of having a student pilot, low-time student pilot, be half mile out doing a slip down in a crosswind that's fairly inconsistent. Maybe it's kind of gusty, so the slip gets steeper through some parts. Your wings are kind of rocking. I can just see a lot of potential problems with that. So I teach the crab to side slip method. I am all about keeping that airplane coordinated at low altitudes, and that's just me. There is a time and a place for slips, absolutely, when they're purposeful and under control, but I'm all about trying to keep that airplane coordinated. And Larry, I'll let you chime in a little bit on that as well, about your techniques.
Okay, what I do is I teach both. But before I even go, what I do is I go out to altitude. I go out to the practice area, and I find a road that's coming probably a little bit, maybe 30 degrees to where the wind is coming from. So I actually have them practice both. So what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I want you to go from 3,000 feet to 2,500 feet. We go into we'll have either full flaps or partial flaps, and I want you to put your hands, sometimes just to get used to their rudders, I'll put their hands actually underneath their thighs. And what they do is they start using rudder. And so that kind of helps them to align it. And then after that, then we go up and then we add aileron to it. And so when I can get them to kind of hold 2,500 feet at 70 knots or even 50 knots, we'll actually get them into slow flight so they get used to doing that. If they can't handle the side slip, that's when I'll actually have them go crab to final. And then the problem that I have with it is me as a student pilot making that transition, going from the crab to when do you start going into putting ailerons into the wind and keeping yourself down. Now, for myself, I've had a whole bunch of problems with that because for some reason, as soon as we get close to the runway, what ends up happening, our brains kind of go a little bit nuts, especially when you get a little bit of a crosswind. Now, in Michigan, you don't have crosswinds. I would say 99% of the time I have a crosswind. Never, ever does the wind come straight down 240. So what's nice about that is my students feel more comfortable doing a crosswind than they actually do if the winds are coming straight down. They actually kind of lose it. And so we practice that a lot. And I let them do both, but most of the time I find that they're more comfortable with just doing the side slip. If we have to do the side slip, I never, ever, ever have them and go more than maybe 10 degrees of flaps. The reason why is because we practice a lot of no-flap landings. And if they're not comfortable doing no-flap landings, then I highly suggest that they go to the crab. I guess maybe unfortunately or fortunately, every single one of my students are really, really good with that. And so they ended up happening, they actually do the side slip. And I actually had one student that couldn't do it, but he actually did the crab. Turned to final. We ended up, I couldn't grab it fast enough. We ended up taking out a couple of runway lights. at the
Wow.
time, and he actually never ever came back
Wow.
and actually took lessons after that. Because what happened? As soon as he got straight down that runway, he forgot to put in his
Wow.
ailerons into the wind. Big gust of wind. I think it was like 20 knots, and away we went doing hard, soft, in the soft, knocking over runway lights.
Wow.
So that's kind of like my take with that. Another like little tip that I also have my students do. I usually, if we're in the pattern, we're not using our VORs. So what I do is I actually have set the top part of the OBS to where the winds are kind of coming from, and they can kind of say, okay, we're going down runway 24. The winds are coming from 180. I have them turn to 180, and that kind of reminds them. Or if you have a bug, you can actually put that on the DG2 to kind of help them see where the winds are coming from. Another advantage that I kind of see with the side slip, it gives them about a half a mile to figure out how much aileron they need and how much rudder they need to hold that center line. So that's my take on that.
Uh, your bug tip, the OBS tip, that's huge, Larry, because that goes back to the first point I made of knowing where that wind is coming from and knowing what I'm facing. Who goes into a battle, and a crosswind landing can be a battle sometimes, not knowing what they're up against. I think one thing you brought up the point of knowing when to transition from crab to side slip method. I think one thing we can both agree on though is I do my best. Now sometimes we can't avoid it, but I do my best to try not to teach a crosswind landing until they have nailed their normal landings. Now, we can't always avoid that. There are some days where you're going, well, listen, buddy, I know you're being hard on yourself. Your landing wasn't that great, but that was just like an 8-knot crosswind, and you did good for an 8-knot crosswind. It's tough to tell students that because they want every landing to be the best, but I really want them to, they don't have to be an expert at normal landings, but they've really got to understand normal landings before I throw them purposefully into that crosswind landing environment. So some great tips, Larry. That bug, I wrote that down. That is that's a very, very smart tip. Those of you out there, I hope you copy that down. Guys, if you struggle with landings, we've got the book, The Secret to Perfect Landings. I believe the URL is just secret2perfectlandings.com. I think it's like $20. Includes over 4 hours of video, a lot of great stuff in there. I encourage you guys to check that out as well. So guys, on behalf of myself, certified flight instructor extraordinaire, Larry Diamond, aka Uncle Larry, and the entire MzeroA.com team, thank you so much for taking your time to listen to Coffee Break Flight Instruction, flight train tips in 15 minutes or less. Enjoy the rest of your day, and most importantly, remember that a good pilot is always learning. Have a great day, guys. See ya.